This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcast, digital, and all forms of news publishing.
We wish you warm greetings from E&P. I'm Mike Blinder, the publisher. Welcome to this episode of E&P Reports. As always, we start off by asking those that are listening to broadcasts of this show to please follow us. Those that choose to watch the video version, please click the subscribe button below. Either way, you should get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of this weekly vodcast series. Caren Bohan, hello and welcome to the program.
Mike, I'm delighted to be here.
We are delighted to have you. Caren, we have a new tradition. You say you've listened to the show. I don't know if you know that every other story we seem to report on at E&P has something to do with AI. So we used to, in the dark ages, go to like LinkedIn and read your profile, introduce you, or go to your Who Is page on USA Today. But I took the liberty of going to ChatGPT and asking it about you. So I'm now going to read to you what ChatGPT says about you, and you're going to rate its accuracy. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Caren Bohan, that's who you are, is an American journalist with extensive experience covering Wall Street and Washington. You have served as the Washington editor of Gannett's USA Today and as a former president of the White House Correspondents Association. That is nice to know. You were born in Boston. During graduate school, you interned with Reuters. And after graduating, you were hired by Reuters. You worked there for a while. And after more than 2 decades, you became a senior editor at Atlantic Media's National Journal. And then eventually in October 2024, you came over to USA Today, it says. In October 2024, you were appointed editor-in-chief of USA Today. It also says you're a member of the Gridiron Club. Did I get that right?
You got just about everything right.
There you go. Well,
a few small nuances, but that's pretty good.
And the reason you're joining us, well, we should have had you on the program a while ago just to chat about the great reporting at USA Today. But moreover now, there was a story that was recently released that has had some twists and turns to it. And let's just tease it first, then we'll get into the meat of this and unpack it. But you had a California woman named Marcella was reunited with her brother Tommy after 25 years, thanks to your reporting, because he was a nonverbal patient at LA hospital. And this is how it all started, correct? The story started there. Do I have that right?
Exactly. The story actually started in May when we wrote about the hospital's alert that this man had turned up in the LA hospital, was nonverbal, nobody knew who he was, and they wanted to find a family member. They knew that probably he had family members who were worried about him. And as a result of our reporting in May, Marcella Nasseri happened to see his picture and recognized it as her brother. The authorities confirmed that it was him, and then she put out a statement on social media saying that she was looking forward to a reunion. She lives in Doyle, California, which is part of Lassen County. So the Lassen County Sheriff's Office put out a press release that got picked up all over the place, as far away as the UK. And so it became this big story because it broke just before Thanksgiving.
But then it took an interesting twist, that the brother's name is Tommy. Further investigation revealed that he's a registered sex offender. And your reporting did more than just reunite this couple. It takes a deep dive into some of the issues in the hospital system, like identifying missing persons, lack of fingerprinting, all this and more. So there's a lot of broader questions as we look at this story. And what I'd like to do is just put you on hold for a second, because I got a number of things I want to ask you about it. But we'll get back to this story on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is exclusively sponsored by Blocks Digital, formerly Town News. Even though the name has changed, their commitment to the media industry is as strong as ever. Blocks Digital is now even better positioned to deliver integrated solutions like content management, audience development, advertising revenue, video management, and more. Join the over 2,000 news publishers worldwide that power their ongoing digital transformation with Blocks Digital, serving over 141 million monthly users who view over 6.5 billion pages of content each year. You can trust Blocks Digital to empower you, to connect you at scale with the community you need to reach. Blocks Digital, formerly Town News, now reimagined to help meet the news publishing challenges of tomorrow and beyond. Learn more at blocksdigital.com.
Let's start off with the feel-good part of this, if we may. The initial reporting and the public impact. Your investigative work really does show the power of journalism. You brought these two people together simply by amplifying the story. Am I right? So there is a, it really does amplify what we do. Don't you agree?
I completely agree. And we often talk at the USA Today network about our service journalism and the service that we provide to readers. I actually prefer to call it public service journalism. That is giving people the information that they need. And, you know, in a lot of ways, it's giving people the information they need to lead their best lives. Sometimes that means, you know, sports coverage. Sometimes that means informing them of events in their community. Sometimes that means informing them about unsolved cases or missing persons cases. I mean, it's a whole gamut of things.
As the story first broke, it was all about feel good in the reunion. Then it took this darker turn. When you got word of that, what happens? What is the process? How do you approach handling updates to stories like this and how you move forward? Do you reassign it? Do you take a different focus? Just give us the backstory of what happens in a newsroom at USA Today.
So when we and others got wind of the fact that this man had been identified, it was through a press release from the sheriff's office in Lassen County, and it was very self-congratulatory. It talked about the great work of these detectives that led to a family reunion, and this was a couple of days before Thanksgiving. So, you know, it seemed like a heartwarming family reunion story around the holidays. It turned out that there were more layers to this story. So, you know, we had our initial story that reported on, you know, his identity being determined, and what his sister had said about how she was looking forward to a reunion. But, you know, as the days ticked by, after Thanksgiving and the reunion didn't take place, we had these nagging questions out there, such as if they're both in California. Now, granted, she was 600 miles away. She had started a GoFundMe account for the reunion. Why hadn't this reunion taken place yet? And we knew that we owed it to our readers to find out the answers to these questions. And so that's when we started digging. And the more we started digging, the more there were questions that arose. And we learned that there was actually, she had talked in her GoFundMe post about wanting to bring him back to Lassen County, needed the money for a medical transfer. And we discovered that there was outrage in the community because he had a criminal record.
Wow.
So we set out to find out what that criminal record exactly was.
The story highlights gaps, and you see, it's like there's so many layers to this. It's amazing. And as I read them, I was going, wow, this thing just keeps changing. You're highlighting gaps now in a system used to identify missing persons, like the absence of fingerprinting. How can journalism spotlight these issues and advocate for change? I know it's part of our job, but how important was that facet as you started digging into the story?
Well, our job is accountability journalism, and our journalism in this case and in some other investigative stories that we've done recently have highlighted gaps in the criminal justice system. You know, the fact that it took months to identify this man and that it wouldn't have happened if not for our story,
Right.
tells you something, you know, in an era of DNA testing and things like that. And then, by the way, you know, the fact that it wasn't originally reported that he was a sex offender was as a result of the fact that authorities in Lassen County didn't coordinate with LA about the fingerprints. And so they didn't find out until days later.
Doesn't it seem, it seems logical that if you have a nonverbal patient, you would use every means to want to identify the patient, fingerprints, facial recognition. You would think that would be part of the system at a hospital, but it's not, right?
Exactly. And there are all these advanced tools. There's AI. There's all these tools at everyone's disposal, and it's very revelatory when you see inside of that system and realize that, there's just so many gaps.
Obviously, this story, is going to hopefully, point some fingers that direction, as you call it, accountability journalism, and make some changes. But let's talk about ethical consequences. There's a public's right to know, but there's also sensitivity to the players in the story. That's kind of tricky, isn't it? And when you're working with the reporters on this.
Exactly. And, so I went into our morning meeting Monday with kind of what I call my spidey sense, like there was something that wasn't adding up about this
Exactly.
story.
Right.
And it bugged me that I couldn't really understand why this reunion hadn't taken place. And so what we talked about in our brainstorming meeting was, you know, my spidey sense is pretty good, but it could be wrong. And this is a sensitive story. And while we have to ask questions, we always have to do it in a sensitive way. This is a story about people at the end of the day. And, you know, whatever questions we have, we owe it to our readers to get those answers, but we also owe it to the people that we're interacting with to be sensitive to their concerns and try to find out without, sort of invading people's privacy.
This story definitely churned some public reaction. I want to ask. There's a couple of parts to this question. What is your policy on that at USA Today when it comes to reader response? Secondly, how driven? I asked Marty Baron this question. How driven are you by the engagement numbers when you're looking at a story? Because there's always the issue where you've got people, I'm sure, pulling at you saying, we need more clicks, we need more page views, we need more engagement. When you see a story like this, how does your brain work with that in your policies at USA Today?
So the way my brain works in terms of metrics, I'm kind of a metrics geek. Like I'm constantly looking at what's resonating with our readers. And I'm not doing it in this way, like let's chase the clickbait. It's actually the opposite of that. I'm interested in what the reader behavior is that's illuminated by these metrics. And I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with this story about the missing man.
Sure.
The Mike Tyson, Jake Paul
Yes.
fight. We were all over that story. The minute it was announced that it might take place last winter, we were all over that story. It crushed everything else in metrics for, days on end. I mean, we were I wouldn't say astonished by the response because we know our audience well enough to know that something like this is likely to connect with them. But what those metrics told us is people want more and more and more. And, we look at those metrics and we say, if people are fascinated by a story and they can't get enough of it, whether it's the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson's fight, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's a missing persons case, then, that's when we flood the zone. We pull out all the stops to get the information that people want and to inform them.
All right. There's this balance between human empathy and journalistic rigor. At least we report, we've done some, we look at study. When you do human stories like this, despite the complexities, how do you handle that empathy versus journalism when the final reporting is going through the editing process? How do you coach the team in that kind of writing? What is the, if I may use this overwords term, what is the ethos of a USA Today when it comes to that?
So I feel very lucky to be editor-in-chief of USA Today for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that we have, as you know, 200 plus papers around the country that are focused on serving their local communities. And a lot of the journalists at USA Today actually come from those papers. So they bring an ethos with them that is very much like, I actually, most of the time, don't have to teach them anything about that. I'll give you an example of that. The Appalachia High School shooting in Georgia earlier this year. Terrible, terrible tragedy. And we sent reporters down there, not because, that was a story that anyone wanted to ever have to cover. It's the story that you never want to have to cover. But we know that a community is grieving. And we know that in an instance like this, they especially need answers. Like, how did this killer fall through the cracks? The youngest mass shooter ever? What happened? What went wrong? How can we keep our communities safe? So we knew we had to report it. But we also knew that the sensitivity part of this was crucial, that, the last thing that you want to do is go into a community where people are grieving and worsen that grief and make them feel that you're kind of gawking at them. I mean, that's horrible. You never want that to happen.
Of course.
And the team of reporters that we sent down there, they were just amazing. They knew, several of them had reported on tragedies and crises before, and they just knew how to approach people. And I'll tell you, Mike, like, one of the things that was so heartwarming to me, we covered every vigil in the aftermath. We were the only news organization that covered every vigil. And some of the people in the community were hugging our journalists, saying, thank you for being here. Thank you for the sensitivity with which you've handled this story.
You've got hundreds and hundreds of news execs right now listening to this program. What lessons have you learned from this particular story that you can share with the industry?
So what I think people can learn from this story in this business is that you've got to let your service to the readers guide you. And, if a story raises more questions than it answers for you, then it is going to do that for our readers. And readers needed to know that there was more to this case. There was anger in the community, and people wanted that information out there. Whatever happens as a result of that information is, a case of let the chips fall where they may. But we've got to stay with a story like this. And it's important. Also, the other thing that I think our reporting on this illuminated within our newsroom is the value of no surprises journalism. There were a lot of tough questions eventually that we had to ask the sheriff's office in Lassen County. Why did you put out this laudatory statement, and why didn't you know more about who this man was and that he was a convicted sex offender? And for the sister who is raising money for a reunion on GoFundMe, are you planning to take the GoFundMe plea down? Are you, how do you feel about the fact that your brother was convicted of this crime? Does that make you feel differently about a reunion? That's a tough question to ask anybody, but it needs to be asked.
Well, Caren Bohan, the editor-in-chief of USA Today, we will definitely have you back on the show. Moreover, those that are listening on a podcast platform, we're going to offer links to all the stories and we'll continue to update the page as well as more reporting comes out of the USA Today newsroom. Thank you so much, Caren, for your time. We really appreciate it. We hope you have a very happy holiday season.
Happy holidays, Mike, and thanks for having me on the show.